Hi, I'm Kristen from Upcycle My Stuff, and I've got another project today. It's part of my Made Fabric series, which is all about how to make fabric from your scraps. This one is is it fabric? Is it a quilt block? It depends how big you make it, I guess. So I'm talking about making some little scrappy squares out of some smaller shapes of scraps. So the stuff that's definitely usually in your scrap bin. So for example, so I've got this one. I like to separate it by color stories usually, but I'll show you some pictures of ones that aren't. So like these kind of sizes, you just get them depends when you're trimming things and things like that. Or, a random triangle with a little doohickey hanging off the end, or even just something as small as that. And you don't have to trim the pieces before we start this, so that's a good thing. We don't have to cut it to any size. So I've got out my work in progress bin. You might have seen that in the sewing room tour. I'll link to it up here or something. So I've been very slowly working on a kind of scrappy farmer's wife quilt. I don't know if you've heard of it. So it's like, anyway, there's a book and there's all sorts of different squares. Excuse me. This always seems to happen. Apologies to the folk who don't like to hear coughing in videos. So anyway, I've been using different little scraps for that. So there's another one with random things. This isn't what we're making, right? So anyway, so I've made all these quilt blocks. So I'll just hold them. Made all these quilt blocks for this particular project. But obviously, look, you're cutting, it's foundation paper piecing. You're cutting random sizes for this, so you end up with really strange shaped scraps, right? I was already kind of using scraps for these, so I'm not using like one colorway for the whole quilt, but even at that, you end up with small scraps. So, so I've got an acrylic template, and I just chose the one that's 3.5 inches, but you could choose a bigger one or a smaller one, or just try and make one big piece in the same way. So when you get to the tutorial, you'll see how you could just keep on going and make it as big as you want, right? But I cut myself off at the 3.5. So these can be also, the way I do it, I've done some that are all like colors, but the way I tend to gravitate to doing it is to putting the scraps in the middle and then using like white scraps on the outside. So these are just some examples of them. Let me find the quilt block that goes with. That was one of the, right, so this is one of the farmer's wife quilt blocks, and then that's one of my scrappy squares that came from the leftovers from this. So you can kind of see how that works. But anyways, I like to somewhat frame them with white. So there's another one from that same block. So it's just a little bit of the colored scrap and then framing them with white. So I usually do this at the end of a quilt block. But if I was just like trying to make my way through my general scrap bin, I would kind of divide it by some sort of color story. So this is like oranges and yellows. And in the tutorial I'm going to show you in a minute, it's greens, the color that I started with. And then I also have a scrap bin of irregular shaped sort of whites and neutrals. Okay, and so then I would sort of do a number of squares with this as the base, the starting point, and this as the sort of frame, right? So these all have, so there's one that's got like blue and pink in the middle, and then the white is the frame. And it can be square like that, or it can be, a bit wonky like that. It's going to depend on, the scraps you have in the middle and how they work out. So you'll see in the tutorial how this happens and how you can kind of have a play and be creative with it, really. And I just think it's so much more, satisfying after you've done a quilt block or something to be able to do something immediately with the scraps and just clean them up. Here's another one of these farmer's wife quilt blocks. Okay, fine. And then these are the squares made from the scraps. So And you can see I just like the white. So you could, for example, if you had, so I've got 3 of these, but let's say I had 4, I could make a 4 in a block, and that could be a square that goes on the back of the quilt. You could just use random ones in a row. If you're like piecing a quilt back and you've got a big piece for one side and a big for the other, and you could obviously just sew those together, but you could also do like a row of these scrappy squares to put some interest in the back. You could pop it on the, on a pouch. They're just like, this is like an interesting bit, and then you've got the rest of the pouch. There's loads of stuff you could do with it, but it's just, I prefer to have a kind of box of these little squares that I can use in something than to have all of the little scraps. And because they're so little, like once I finish one of these blocks, and I just can see all the scraps lying around my sewing machine, then I can just, at the end of the night when I just want to play or whatever, make these little squares. And then I've cleaned up my mess and I've got some other little blocks. So you don't have to have a plan for what to use for them, but I prefer doing that. So you can do them really angular, or you could do them, totally random. And I quite like the ones, let me find one, that kind of end up looking a bit like blooms or flowers, or not flowers, almost like a peephole kind of diamond thing. That's probably the close. So this is one where I didn't use white. I used another color, but it's like so there's like something kind of emerging from the middle. I don't know how else to explain that. But I'll show you. So we'll get on with the tutorial. I'll show you how you do it, and you can kind of see. So it's got minimal, you trim as you go. You do end up with a little bit of leftover stuff, but I think this is just so much more useful to kind of have sitting around than odd little corners and things like that. So especially if you do intricate little quilt blocks like this, where you're cutting out all sorts of strange shapes, so you're going to end up with strange scraps. I've got other videos for similar, like irregular shaped. So I've got, in the Made Fabric series, is one where you can make it with all the same fabric. But anyway, so this is another option. So I hope you like it. Let's get on with the tutorial. So I hope you liked that tutorial and that you'll be making all sorts of little squares at the end of your projects now. But again, you can make those any size. You want to make that like a full quilt block size, like a 6-inch or a 12-inch. You can absolutely do that if you've got the template that's the right size. So just have fun with it. And if you like videos like this and you want to see more, then do hit subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, and do leave me a comment and let me know if you tried this or if you've got other ways of using up those tiny little scraps. I would love to hear about it. Okay, speak to you soon.